Thank you. We are now live streaming, so we will proceed by popular demand. We will be doing the Inspiring Communities update next. I'm led to believe by the Cabinet member that this will be a brief and punchy item, and I look forward to hearing it. So Alison and your team, please go ahead.
Thank you very much, Chairman. Can I introduce Samantha? She's going to be going through the thing today. And basically, yes, it is going to be short and sweet, but really, really important to understand the impact what we've had on communities across Breckland. So over to you, Sam.
Thank you, Chairman. Thank you, Alison. So today I've brought a presentation forward to showcase inspiring communities, how we define inspiring communities, the scope of our programme, how we make our decisions, and importantly, how members can get involved. So Inspiring Communities brings together what we do as a community service. So everything that we do to work with our communities comes under the Inspiring Communities brand name. We have a clear vision and mission and have outlined our commitments. So our vision is to inspire our communities to enhance the lives of Breckland residents through strategic partnerships, early intervention services, community funding, and our Inspiring Communities programme, which is the 1 million investment over 3 years, with the specific aim of making a positive impact to those affected by domestic abuse, mental health issues, social isolation and loneliness, and county lines. To do that through our mission is to collectively lead, enable and support a district-wide approach to improving resident wellbeing. So the scope of the programme, so this does predate me. Steve and other senior managers came together, brought in partners to that discussion to look at what matters to our community, what issues are we experiencing within the community, and agree what we focus on, which is how we define the scope of the Inspiring Communities programme. So the outcome of that was that we want to focus on the county lines exploitation, the domestic abuse and violence, and those becoming socially isolated and lonely, and poor mental health across the district. Each of these are known to be national issues, but there is evidence to tell us that these are local problems as well. So just a bit of evidence is 890 people were arrested between December 2016 and December 2018 in conjunction with Operation Gravity, which is the Norfolk-wide county lines operation. There's 17.1 incidents of domestic abuse for every 1,000 residents in Norfolk. Over 6,000 Breckland residents over 65 state that they are lonely, and women experiencing domestic abuse are more likely to experience mental health problems, while women with mental health problems are more likely to be domestically abused. So just a bit of an infographic here to showcase some of the reasons why we need inspiring communities. Breckland is a safe, healthy and prosperous place to live and work, but some of our residents are vulnerable. So the stats tell us that there's 3,500 children living in poverty in Breckland. The average weekly wage in Breckland is £498.30 compared to £590.30 across the east of England. 83% of our wards have more people with no GCSE qualifications than the national average. The life expectancy reduces 6 years between Toffwood and Thetford, just 23 miles away. Evidence suggests that the effect of loneliness on life expectancy is equivalent to smoking 15 cigarettes a day. 1 in 6 people in our district experience domestic abuse, but only 24% report this to the police. So what have we done so far? Inspiring Communities delivery. So this is just some headlines out showcasing some of the activity under each of our 4 priorities. So first, for county lines, we funded the auto number plate recognition cameras. We funded an improved search facility at Wayland Prison, and we are working with the Police Crime and Commissioner's Office to develop a contextual safeguarding locality plan to look at areas of concern across the district. We've got some examples here for you. So just with regards to some evidence around county lines, so drug incidents at Wayland Prison have risen over 66% between year ending March 2017 and year ending March 2020. County lines networks began noticeably forming in 2018, and they are the most commonly used network for the transportation of drugs, including into prisons. So We formed partnerships with Wayland Prison and Norfolk Police to talk about how we could support the prevention of child criminal exploitation across the district, to tackle some of the main routes of drug supply, to help us identify and convict known traffickers and gain intelligence to break the lines within the district. So domestic abuse. So we funded the Early Help Support Worker for Daisy programme. We are developing an internal domestic abuse commitment and have signed up to the HERE campaign. HERE is Help, Educate, Awareness and Respond. And it's a joint campaign with Norfolk County Council and the Police Crime and Commissioner's Office. An example around reasonings behind domestic abuse. So the number of domestic abuse crimes per quarter has risen 43% over the past 3 financial years in Norfolk. Domestic abuse is an underreported crime nationally. Our investment in funding the Early Help Support Worker with Daisy not only provides direct support to survivors, but the aim of that role is to recruit domestic abuse ambassadors to ensure meaningful conversations are held across the district and help identify and support survivors of domestic abuse. Our commitment to mental health, we've funded the Breckland Mental Health Community Partnership. We've co-designed the Mindful Towns and Villages project, and we have funded Breckland Youth Advisory Board Mental Health Partnership. Independent research and evaluation shows that taking part in mental health training raises awareness of mental health issues. It encourages early intervention to aid recovery, increases confidence in dealing with mental illness, and reduces stigma around mental health issues. The Breckland Mental Health Community Partnership and Mindful Towns and Villages project is about community-led prevention, recognising the impact of mental health in our communities and how it can often lead to wider community issues such as antisocial behaviour, housing issues, financial hardship, food poverty, and food poverty. And it brings communities together to develop a support network that's able to work together to tackle mental health by reducing stigma, teaching self-management techniques to better mental health, but it also enables people to recognise when a person needs professional support to avoid them reaching crisis point. Social isolation and loneliness. So we've directly funded and we deliver the Silver Social Programme, and we've been commissioned by Mid-Norfolk Primary Care Network to deliver social prescribing services with the Mid-Norfolk GP services. Social prescribers deal with socially isolated and lonely people almost daily. It's the highest referral concern, closely followed by housing needs. So far, since joining in July, our social prescribers have received and managed over 100 referrals. Social prescribing can help with a range of positive health and wellbeing outcomes for people, such as reducing loneliness. And the service also supports the District Council in the integrated care system upcoming. Through the partnership with Mid-Norfolk, we aim to see a reduction in demand and complexity of cases in both health and council service areas. So how do we make decisions? So the Inspiring Community Programme has been developed with an evidence base, as we've talked about, to inform projects and funding. We work with partners, and in doing so, we're able to identify need and build capacity from grassroots up in our community. So the series of questions we ask when making decisions is, first of all, is there data-driven evidence? Is there an evidence base to inform the need? And as we have a scope within our programme, does it meet the scope of the programme? The programme scope, as we've already explained, is county lines, domestic abuse, mental health and social isolation and loneliness. So we ask ourselves the question, does it meet the scope of that programme by providing a solution to the prevention of one or more of those 4 priorities? We ask, what are the benefits and impact? So does the evidence base provide scope for measuring impact? Could the impact be measured by case studies? Are there fiscal benefits? And if so, how are they achieved? And is there a partner-led approach? So not all projects are partner-led, but the majority are. So we work with partners, we either commission partners to deliver projects or potentially could receive funding. So could this be a jointly funded project so that we're not funding a project in its entirety? Does it meet a combined agenda with our partners? And if a commission project, what outcomes will the partner meet and how? Additionally, for local solutions, community groups have the ability to bid for match funding to run community projects to enhance the offer. And this is our annual funding scheme that was previously the Breckland Match Funding, is now the Inspiring Communities Fund. The scheme allows communities to find local solutions to local needs. So what does this scheme offer? So the Inspiring Communities Fund is a match funding scheme of providing grants of up to £5,000 for community projects across the Breckland district, and applicants can expect to receive a maximum of 50% of the total cost of their projects. Who can apply? Community projects that can demonstrate that they address identified community needs and align to the Breckland Council corporate plan. Applicants could be a charity, a faith organisation, a town or parish council, a local school, a social enterprise, or a voluntary or community group. Our commitment in 2021 was to fund £100,000, or sorry, put £100,000 into that fund for the application year. So to summarise what happened, the scheme launched in April 2021. We've issued just over £100,000 to community groups across Breckland already, and the scheme closed to new applications in August 2021 as that fund had been fully utilised. As part of that, grants were issued to parish councils, community groups such as village halls, and they're all supporting worthy causes across the district. So the fund has improved facilities and enabled enhanced services to our communities, but additionally, by funding these projects, has levered in £250,000 to the district, sorry, over £250,000. So how can members get involved? So there's a long list there. I'm not going to read it out to you, but essentially we can connect you into the mental health support through a range of initiatives, helping people directly through our early help collaboration meetings or social prescribing service. We can support any one of our 4 priorities through our partner relationships. We can support with community development, community engagement, and we can connect onto other services such as the volunteering and good neighbour schemes as well. Of course, there's the community safety aspect, so any antisocial behaviour across our communities, we can support with that. And it is our services' responsibility to run the assets of community value applications, and the community car scheme funding as well. I will just say at this point, we're working on a range of marketing collateral available to that will be made available to members that will summarise everything that we can connect members into to be able to support the communities. So that will comprise a brochure outlining all of our services, various leaflets about how we can support, and there'll be social media campaigns coming up as well. So I just thought this is a really nice sort of showcase slide, really. So this isn't an exhaustive list of our partners. This just includes just some highlights of partners that we're working with. But again, just thought I'd include this as just a really nice visual representation of how many people we are working with across the district. Thank you. Any questions? Was that short and sweet?
Thank you very much. Members have had the benefit of the report and, of course, that fantastic presentation. Roger, I'll go to members first and I'll come to you, Roger. So Fabian, then Terry, then Roger. I don't think anyone else indicated. Go ahead.
Yeah, I do apologise. I'm suffering from auctioneer's throat, which doesn't really help. But thank you. It's very inspiring, excellent report. Just recently, my ward and other things, and COVID, how it affected. I've actually found that the young people are jealous that the elderly or the older members of our district have the silver social. And why aren't we helping their clubs and then coming on so they can go out and meet anywhere? And then the older generation are jealous that the young people are getting capital projects such as skate parks. So I know you can't win and please everyone, but I think we need to be a balance and say that the young people don't need or don't always want a capital project, and they do want something, so that means their club is funded and they can run their club in a village hall, whether it's a young farmers or scouts or anything, and it's made available or something else they want to do. And I think sometimes our older generation do want something else rather than a silver social. And I've realised from my own work just how we had to reduce numbers through COVID, and we had to be only dedicated purchasers and that could turn up. 75% of the people who attend my business attend for the social and the care. So if they're out in a village, and I can think of Councillor Atwell, there's a 90-year-old gentleman lives in Swanton Morley. He comes to Swaffham on a regular basis. He's been doing so since 70 years. That's probably his only activity, and he's got people he's known. So he's known me for near on 50 years. And that makes a significant difference to him. And that was extremely hard. He may well have, and he probably has got a lot of contact in that village, but he lost a huge segment of what he had that connection with. And I think sometimes we've got to go where the people are. And I've also seen recently how people even eating, so the elderly then decline if they're on their own, don't eat, so they will eat at a social event where they are with their friends, and their friends say, you need to be eating this. So I think we've got to not narrow it down and say everything is on the table. So I'm not knocking what you have done, and I think it's brilliant. But I think we've got to say everything is on the table and everything is considered. We will not discount everything. And if there, I think, excellent. Thank you.
Thank you. Terry.
Thank you, Chairman. I've got a couple of points, if I may. Firstly, I'm a big supporter of the work that you guys do, and sort of thanks to the team, really, particularly during COVID. You know, the work kept going, and it was probably even more important than ever. And I'm also grateful for the presentation in advance, so we could have a good look through. I learned two things from the presentation. One, if I want to live 6 more years longer, I need to move to Toffwood. But it does go to show the difference in statistics across Breckland in a relatively short space, but also the stats on wage inequality concern me greatly, because if we're £100 a week less than the East of England average, and I know the East of England rate is low compared to the rest of the country, so just reinforce my view that wage inequality and that sort of thing is absolutely crucial for us here in Breckland. I've got some points about the general approach to the Inspiring Communities programme, and the slide about governance for me is probably the most important one. As I say, I have sat on grant panels and worked in the community sector for a long while. What I would ask you is to keep in mind, whether you answer it today or just take it away and ponder it. For me, sustainability is key. Very often councils will set things up and they're not sustainable. And as soon as you guys take a step back, they don't carry on. And, you know, embedding projects and services in communities that are sustainable is absolutely key for me. And how you guys approach and assess sustainability is important. And also the evidence base. So it's to Breckland's credit that we have the Inspiring Communities programme, but it's a significant amount of money, but not significant to the need that's there, if that makes sense. So how you assess evidence of need is absolutely crucial, and how you determine where to spend what is relatively small amount of money is important to me too. And also how members are involved in identifying priorities. So you've spoken about leaflets and information, essentially telling us as members what's happening. I would like to be involved in shaping what's happening as a member of the council. As Fabian has said, you know, there's 49 of us. We all have an awful lot of local knowledge. We want to be community champions, and, you know, the stuff that we know about need and local priority. How we shape some of your list of what's happening is still a bit unclear to me. Don't get me wrong, I like what's happening, but what's important to me in Thetford Borough Ward may be different to, say, Swanton Morley or elsewhere in Fabian's patch. So to what extent we can evolve Inspiring Communities to involve members more, I would be keen for you guys to explore. But generally speaking, thank you very much.
Thank you, Terry. I'll go to Roger, and then we'll let Alison and her team respond. Go ahead, Roger.
Yeah, thank you, Chairman. I think Councillor Eagle is absolutely right. I think that it's incumbent on all parish and town councils actually to do some work to engage with their community. Some do it better than others. I know in our community at Swanton Morley, we've just set up a community CAF. We write to every household. Every household gets you know, a small pamphlet sent from the parish council every 3 months, and we've got a volunteer run group. There are other parishes that do more than that. There are parishes that do very little. So I think my plea to the team would be continue the engagement with parish and town councils, because generally they do have resources and small pots of money that they can perhaps put into a programme in that community. And I just want to say, as Terry said, thank you for the work that you're doing. Sam, is it possible you can send me the slides, because I forgot my glasses today, so it was all a blur really, and I'd like to be able to read it up in my own time. And just give you an example, I mean, Steve has been out to see me at Swanton Morley on my patch, which I found very productive, and we're going to do more of those sessions. And we talked at length about the mental health awareness training, and I know that I've signed myself and my parish council staff up at Swanton Morley, and we're looking forward to that, because I think it's a very important subject. So I think this is a project of many strands, but I think that can make a big difference. I said, just my plea is more engagement with the parishes. If you've got leaflets that you want to send out, and as Fabian said, trying to reach perhaps a 90-year-old gentleman, when I send out my parish council leaflets, I can tuck your bits inside it and they can all be delivered at the same time. Those sorts of things, I think we can continue that engagement. I think that's an excellent programme, and well done everybody concerned. Thank you.
Thank you very much. I've got Harry and then Fabian.
Thank you, Chairman. Yes, thank you very much for your presentation, and had an opportunity to look at it with the right glasses, unfortunately. Not my driving glasses. No, very excellent stuff there. I was very pleased to see the range of partners there. I think as Fabian and also Councillor Atherwell has talked about the engagement and town councils and parishes, I think it's always dangerous to make an assumption. In the whole of Breckland, we also have we've got the district council, we've got parish council, we've also got county councillors, and some of those obviously attend the different town and parish councils. And I think it's important that all those people are on the same page, so that people understand that there are the other elected representatives at county to understand the opportunities that may be there from the county end to reinforce that, so they can link up with people in district. And I'm thinking, say, for example, I might have in my own ward something which, well, that could be turned into an asset of community value, and where we can put heads together rather than sort of some of the past sort of silo work that we may or may not have. We'll always have some differences of emphasis, but that's just something just to bear in mind. Thank you, Chairman.
Thank you. Sorry, Julie, you had something you wanted to say?
Yeah, I just wanted to say that the presentation slides were sent to all members on Monday by email.
I'm sure it doesn't deserve to be in there, Roger. Fabian.
Yeah, sorry, mine's just a bit of community benefit for Councillor Atwell and Harry Clark. I've had the same problem as these. I've now got these little reading glasses, and they fix inside your phone, so you've always got them with you. Just as a little bit of a community benefit. You may look a complete idiot, but I prefer that all of you joined in with me and look in that same stance. But
I encourage members to stay on point. That was an inspiring intervention. Thank you. Are there any other members who wish to speak on the item before us? Otherwise, Alison, do you guys want to come back and comment on anything you've heard? Otherwise, we'll note the report.
That's okay. Right, we're arguing who's going to finish. Okay, right. Thank you all for your comments and for the praise to the team, which have worked very hard to get as far as we are. However, points to take forward, which completely take on board. Sustainability is a big thing. When we do inspiring communities, we don't want to just put something in place that's going to disappear after 3 years. We want something that's going to make a lasting impression to the community that are involved in it. So this is part of the challenge, because yes, we can plough money into putting something like silver services in place, but actually going forward, we can't do it forever. We've got to try and get buy-in from the community to actually run things like that. So it's something which we need to look at. And we picked that up straight away. Evidence, evidence coming out of our ears on different things, to be perfectly honest. It's prioritising the evidence, which is the big challenge. You talked about involving shaping what's happening and parish councils. I'm pleased to say that we've already picked up on that, and Sam's going to be going round to town councils and parish councils to actually talk to them about what we're doing here, hand out the leaflets, make it more accessible. I mean, there's always a point of contact within our area if there's any ideas that come forward from your area. I'll give you an example. Social prescribers. If you have an individual in your area who you feel would benefit from social prescribers. I don't know if you understand the importance of this, but it's things that people go to the doctor, say I'm lonely, then at the end of the day, the doctor just keeps giving them medication. No, that's not the way forward. The way forward is for social prescribers to talk to them, sit to them, say what's the issues, and if it's loneliness, introduce them to other people in different ways, like football matches, like coffee shops. And this has been working really well, and 100 people should, you know, this is really good and success going forward. So these sorts of things are the things that we need to work together with you guys to make happen and to benefit the community. We did try, I will say, and I'm going to be honest about this, you talked about young people. We did a programme earlier in the year to help young carers in the same sort of way as the Silver Social. Unfortunately, it wasn't took up as much as we hoped it would. So we've stopped it and we're going to try it again next year. It's something that we bear in mind because we understand young carers have a big, big challenge to spend time actually for themselves. So, you know, we're going to try again. It's difficult sometimes gauging, getting the right times of the day, the right days, everything like that. So that's where we are. But thank you all so much for listening. Was there anything else, Steve? Have I missed anything? No, us apparently I've done a good job. Thank you.
Thank you very much for that report. That's excellent. Are members happy to note the contents of that report? That is duly noted. Thank you very much. You, of course, are also welcome to stay for the other exciting agenda items before us, which moves us on to item 8, which is the chairman's panel. Nigel and Simon's going to do a quick opening presentation, and then we'll go to members.
Thank you, Chairman. Members of the Commission have the report in front of them, so I'm just going to do a few highlights really to stimulate the debate. Chairman's panel was introduced following the Planning Advisory Service review in 2018. That required the Council to review its delegation and call-in process, and it advised us to reduce the number of items going to committee. And I think the report makes clear, pre-chairman's panel and post-chairman's panel, the impact that has had. All call-in applications go to chairman's panel, as well as the more contentious and significant applications. I would also say that there is the facility as well, following due process, for applications that it is considered appropriate to do so, can go straight to committee and bypass chairman's panel, and that does happen on occasion. Since April last year to September this year, we've had 129 applications at chairman's panel, 41 have gone to planning committee, 88 have been delegated, 44 of those have been call-in applications. The panel makes recommendations, and of those recommendations, there have been 5 decisions within 2021 which have not gone with recommendation. All but one of those have sent applications the panel recommended for delegation to committee. So it has given members more oversight of that application. Members can attend chairman's panel. It's a virtual process, and there is no view to change that at the moment. It felt it works well on that basis. It provides members with a clear oversight of the call-in process and the process of the panel, and it's very transparent. It allows the more contentious and significant applications to go to committee. It allows committee to be more focused, and it leads, in my view, to better decision making. There was a tendency in I'll use the phrase the old days. There was a tendency in the old days for items at the back end of the committee agenda just to be be passed through without discussion, and that doesn't serve any purpose. The report that you have in front of you was presented to Planning Committee a couple of meetings ago. It was endorsed by members of the committee who recognise the good work that the chairman's panel does. It's transparency, the ability to allow committee to focus on applications that require its attention, and the fact that it responds well to members' concerns and to the call-in process. So open for comment and questions, Chairman.
Thank you very much. And for the committee, if I could give us, sorry, Nigel, do you want to?
Yes, I was just going to add, the chairman's panel works very well. We had a couple of members who were, I wouldn't say anti it, but had their reasons to have concerns, and actually attending and witnessing it, realise it was for the good. And if we looked at the past, which was in my position, because I've been chairman for quite a considerable time, did someone say, oh, I didn't need that. I didn't need that barracking. In the past, it was just down to the chairman, and literally a couple of years before PAS, I had actually said I would love to be in a position where we could sort of sort out the wheat from the chaff type thing, and that was my inkling to do something like that. And PAS came down and said this is what needs to be done, because they felt that the chairman had personally too much responsibility, and I was glad that was then highlighted from an outside authority. And I'm sort of glad that it came on. And we even discussed the possibility of 5 members and things like that. But I had always said 3 members was the way forward, because we could always ensure on at least getting 3 members. And it has been a struggle sometimes to get 3 members, but at least we'd have an unbalanced vote if need be, and take it from there. There's a lot of consideration goes into the panel, and anyone who's, especially in this forum today, who's not seen a panel, I would advise them to attend and just witness it in the future. Thank you.
Thank you very much. Before I go to members, so a small amount of background, I was asked by a number of members to bring this governance process into scrutiny to have a look at and review. I appreciate it has also obviously gone to the planning committee. The one question I wanted to ask, which Simon, you touched on, was you said there is a method by which items go directly onto the planning agenda. Could I just check, how does that process work, and whom are the decision makers along that journey?
The process is set out in the Constitution, and that enables the Executive Director, in consultation with the Chairman of Planning, to take that view.
Very good, thank you. I've had some members indicate. I'll go to Tim first, then David, then Ian, then Peter, then Fabian, and then Steve. Go ahead, Tim. Oh, and then Roger, yeah.
Okay, thank you. So undoubtedly, the primary objective of reducing planning committee workload has been is a success. I'm just slightly worrying. Can we go to page 16, section 1.17, where it says it is considered that the panel process is transparent? It seems unusual wording there. So there is a consideration that it's transparent. I would have thought that was something that says perhaps needs a little bit more force behind it to demonstrate that it is. So with that in mind, how many people on average actually attend the chairman's panel who are non-speaking, just to observe it? And is there a reason why it can't be streamed so that members of the public can see it? And just a final question, if I may. So the ultimate decision is made by the monitoring officer or the council solicitor. They take the actual final say-so, and I can't find any guidance on this. So, and I can understand why an officer would want to push something towards the planning committee, but I'm slightly concerned that you could also, without any rules, that an officer could take away that requirement and just force it to be delegated. Is there any ruling on that?
So I know that that latter instance has occurred as well. It's in the report, but most have led to the item going to committee rather than the panel's recommendation that it does not. But I know that there have been instances where the reverse has been true. In relation to your two other points, I will go out. I doubt very much that Simon or Nigel have a record of the average attendance of each meeting. And I think I already know the answer to why it's not streamed for the public, but I will give them the opportunity to speak first, just so they can clarify those 2 points.
Yes, well, we have had Councillor Burt attend, but we don't see his pretty face. He's always up there as being there, but never visual. So that is that. And there are a few other people, and I'd have, you know, we have had members who just come in. It might be a neighbouring ward that they're interested, or they might just be monitoring it for another member who can't monitor it on the day themselves. But it is a recorded item. And it's not, I mean, it might be chairman's panel, which makes it sound like it's mine. It is as chairman, but I think it works very, very well. And it's very rare that we get challenges. And I don't like to name names, but I know Councillor Askew was very much a case of aggressive at the idea of it, but actually sat through a couple of different ones and actually complimented it on the process of it, and was, in fact, you know, very pleased with some of the outcomes, even though one of them, I think, didn't go his way. But he still said, no, it was fair, and he could understand how it was. And I'm not inviting him to say something completely different, but it was that type of thing. It was an unknown entity to this council.
For time's sake, I'll allow you to make all of the good comments in favour of the current governance of a chairman's panel in one go, if we could focus just on the questions put by members. And the second one was whether or not it could be streamed to the public. I'm inviting you to say that the reason it's not streamed to the public is because it's a non-decision making panel. So
yes, that's correct. It's
a
non-decision making panel, and it's discussing process, not merits of an application. And just taking on board the comments of Councillor Burt, I'm quite happy to nail my colours to the mast and say that this is a more transparent process.
Very good. I'm glad you consider it to be so. So I think, David, you were next, so go ahead.
Thank you, Chair. As somebody who has actually sat on the panel on quite a few occasions, I endorse what has been said. I think it's a very good vehicle to be used. And I was very pleased to see the recent development where the actual results of the chairman's panel are now being publicised, which didn't happen right from the very beginning. But so it's very transparent that way as well. And it does demonstrate something I mentioned at a previous meeting on the chairman's panel, that most of the decisions made by the three-person panel are then endorsed by the officers, who normally is either Rob or Simon. And it's very rare, I think, that that there is a disagreement. There's a vote by the three-member panel for committee that it's overturned, or vice versa, overturned from committee to delegation or whatever. But I just have one question for Simon, I suppose, in terms of, yes, if it's called in, it automatically goes to the panel. The sort of rather subjective terminology of contentious and significant, who actually makes that decision, whether it goes to panel or not, in that sense? Is it yourself and Nigel who makes that decision, or? Oh, sorry.
Yeah, it would be an officer, either myself or the head of development management, that would liaise with the chairman about an application. And that would be an application where there's a significant policy issue, or it would be an application that has generated a significant amount of local comment, either one way or the other. And if the local comment, for example, is extremely positive, but officers are minded to refuse an application, they may well take the view in discussion with the chairman that is best heard by committee. And that gives residents the opportunity then to speak at committee, of course.
Thank you. And then Ian.
Thank you, Chairman. First off, I think I probably characterise myself certainly as a sceptic when this was initially proposed, and in the format it was initially proposed. I am incredibly encouraged by the way that it has evolved. and take my hat off to Nigel to actually seeing through some significant changes, which really has widened it out. And there's one thing to add to the reason for the transparency, and it's a tremendous learning exercise. So I am one of those, when I can, that do attend, even if I haven't got an application being considered, to actually see what is being said, what the officers are thinking, what's the logic. I may not always agree, but it is interesting to hear the process and what they're weighing in the balance. So no, I think it's come an awful long way. I'm relieved to hear that it's going to stay online, because that certainly increases my ability to attend, if nothing else. I have one main point, which I have raised before, but I will raise again in this context. With the call-in timetable, members have 23 days from when the application is listed and circulated to decide whether to call it in. And that's it. And it may at that point possibly not come to one's attention. It may not have realized the level of local feeling, or there may be points of policy that one hadn't considered, because we're not all experts in this. And the fact that it is cut off at 23 days and not allowed another chance in certain circumstances is incredibly frustrating. My proposal is that the clock should actually be restarted if and only if officers have decided to go out for full reconsultation. So there's a clear breakpoint and a clear trigger, so that it's not extending the process, because the process is being extended by officers already because of what they see. So that's a suggestion which I retable. The other one is more minor, and I think I'm starting to learn my way around it. But unlike at planning, the ward councillor speaks first before they see the officer presentation. Obviously, they've seen the report, but they haven't seen the officer presentation. The ward member has 2 minutes. Some of the officer presentations can be quite lengthy, and it may not necessarily proportionately reflect the importance of that particular application. And by the time it gets turned to the chairman's panel actually discussing, there is a real danger that whatever the ward member has said has disappeared into thin air. As I'm starting to learn some tricks to think which are getting around this, but it would actually be quite nice if the officers did their presentation. The member would then make their presentation informed by the officer representation and pick up the points. And that's a minor one. The first one is my most important, but overall, and I'm very pleased that it's staying online and very impressed with the way it's operating. Thank you, Chairman.
Thank you. Peter.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman. Yeah, representing the council, Gordon and I and a senior officer went over to South Holland, and we saw their panel in action over there. And we felt that was a way of supporting officers when they had doubts and different things like that. So we saw that working, and it did work. The delegation is always been the same before the panel. The call-in was put on the shoulders of the chairman and a senior officer, and even though Nigel said he's got a broad back, it wasn't fair to him to have that criticism. So Paz did come up with a great idea for this panel. Like I said, the delegation is still the same, call-in is the same, but it's now played out in front of members. So there's nothing been hidden. It's always been this process before this panel.
Thank you. And Fabian.
Thank you, Chair. Just responding on the point, I've attended 2 the chairman's panels. One was very early on, and I had a very good experience. One was just recently, not so good, but it changed. So when you went as a ward member to speak, you were allowed to expand far more why you wanted it to go to planning. When the protocol came up for the next one, you were heavily curtailed in 1.15, as Councillor Martin has then said. The officer can elaborate quite heavily and emphasise the problems. You're not allowed to elaborate on that point, which is, on both of my cases, it was community benefit. Both had slightly similar community benefits, regardless of the application. You're not allowed to mention that. I wasn't the first time it was successful, then went through. And I think we've got to mention on all those cases, particularly on both of those cases, it had the democratic support. It had gone through all the bits. So you had all ward members, county council, all the democratically elected people were in favour, and then it was overturned. Doesn't look good on us as a democratic. Breckland District Council is a democratic body. We are not there as anything else. So people perceive that as elected. And the first thing they see about anyone, or the two things, is your bins and planning. Very little else. And then when suddenly you say you haven't gone to that hurdle and got that, why not? We were in favour, we were not. We have to allow that to go through and forget whether that is up for refusal or up for approval. That needs to go to that planning committee to have that full democratic oppose when it's gone to that stage and has that overwhelming support. But it must be, as Councillor Martins alluded, some way you need a short minute as a comeback and to fully expand why you want that call in. If you don't attend the call in, you do not attend as the ward member to that chairman's panel, that is your loss. But at the moment, I feel that if I called in something again, I would not go there because I do not feel that I would get the fair chance to present my case. And it is officer weighted. And it does not do what it says on the tin. The basic is very, very good on that point, but as a ward member, it does not do that point. So I'm not, it's a minor criticism, but an important one on my point.
Thank you. And then I've got Steve and then Roger.
Thank you, Chairman. I tend very much to agree with what Fabian has just alluded to, really. You know, Nigel and people will know that I've called several in recent times. And I do think that the panel certainly has its place. I think it has been very successful. And I don't disagree with the concept at all, because I think it's good and it's sound in principle. However, and I've won some and I've lost some, and that's fine, and I don't mind that either. But I certainly do agree with what Fabian has alluded to regarding presentation by members, because I find myself in a situation, like he said, you've got 2 minutes at the start, and an officer can come back, and it's not personal because I think the officers do a grand job. They'll come back with a report, and I can see things in that report that actually are incorrect, but I'm not in a position to put it right because nobody's going to allow me to say anything else, and that is very frustrating. But what can you do? So you just have to go with it. Secondly, what I also fear in this situation is that what you're allowed to say or how you're allowed to deal with an application that you've called into panel, you're limited to what you can comment on due to the guidelines that you're given, and or the criteria you're given is quite strict. Now, I've been a member of this council for nearly 20 years now, and I know things do change, and that's sometimes for the better, but not always. And as a member, when I first joined here, you could call anything into the committee, and you could have your say on it. And I appreciate the reasons why we're trying to get beyond that and cut things back, and that's sound. However, there are aspects to applications which are relevant to the local area, and sometimes local knowledge, members' local knowledge, has a bearing on what members of committee have to say or in their deliberations. You can't put that across at the panel, and so you have to try and find a way of getting it to committee, and virtually you're trying to invent something as a member which you can try and pick out of a report, which may, just may, give you an opportunity to get it to the panel. And I find that quite frustrating, because the things you really want to say to the committee, you can't say to the panel. I don't know whether that makes sense, but it is damn frustrating when you can't get that across. And what it does as a member is you're feeling a little less empowered, you feel that what's your role? You know, am I here to represent the people? Am I here to try and put a point across, which I believe is relevant to the village, parish, whatever? But actually, my role has been watered down again, and I feel that you're being sort of had the shackles put on you a bit by what you can do. That said, you know, the principle again, I'll come back to, I think is sound. It's just tinkering with how things work to get it right. But the other thing I would just point out is, and again, it's not down to personalities because it isn't, but this whole principle of members of the panel will vote, but then actually an officer will make the decision. And I find that a bit odd, and I don't find it very democratic, as Fabian has alluded to. And I just don't think that's the right way of doing things. And don't get me wrong, I've had an officer overturn a panel in my favour, and I was very grateful and heartened by that for that particular one. But generally, in principle, I don't think that's the way forward. But I'm not critical of the process and the people who do it at all. It's just these odd little bits which I find a little disturbing. Thank you very much.
Thank you, Steve. Roger?
Yeah, thank you, Chairman. 2 or 3 things I just want to raise. Nigel, you mentioned about sceptical people. I was one of them. I was one that spoke against this when it came to full council, and I had serious reservations about the process. My main reservation was about democratic oversight and sort of scrutiny of the process. And I'm very happy that with the process, as long as it remains on virtual Zoom meetings, so everybody can access it. What I didn't like when it was set up originally was this was going to happen in a meeting room in this council building, and didn't get to see any minutes, didn't know what was going on, etc. So as long as it's a virtual meeting, I think that is a good thing, and I would ask that to continue. I take on board what Steve has said about seems a little bit bizarre that we've got officers making the decision, but originally I had argued that that should be a decision-making body, and that should be the members. If there's 3 members there, make the vote. That shouldn't necessarily be the Rob or Mike coming to the meeting, because they can override what the members have decided. Now, I don't know whether that will change. I mean, I'm relatively comfortable with the process. I don't think there's many where they've actually overturned what the members have suggested in that, but that's something that maybe we need to look at. The last thing I just want to pick up on is what Councillor Martin said regarding this 23 days. I've got experience of this, and I'll give you an example, and I would very much hope that this commission would ask the chairman of the planning committee to review this. We had an instance where I had a planning application that came in for my village at Swanton Morley. Parish council considered it. 23 days passed, and then the planning officers sent out a reconsultation with amended plans, and the parish council didn't like that, and I could see that there was problems with that amended application. I submitted a request to call that in, and the unelected head of development service told me, the elected member, that I wasn't allowed to call it in and I wasn't allowed to speak, which you can imagine, people know me well, didn't sit too comfortably with me. I made representations to executive director. The application did go to, I think he asked for that to go to the chairman's panel, but I was not allowed to speak. So that was something that was done totally out of my control because the 23 days had passed. So I do think there's something that perhaps needs to be amended in the constitution, that after that 23 days, if the officers are reconsulting the parishes on an amended application, that clock should start again from that point, I believe. Thank you.
Thank you. I've got Peter again, then I've also got Gordon. Then I'd like to make my points. and then I have Rob chomping at the bit to make his intervention. So Peter first, then Gordon, then me, and then Rob.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman. I wasn't going to say anything else again because I've got another meeting at 4 o'clock across the district. What happens when Rob or Mike's there? If they feel that the members who are voting on the planning application are going into detail and it looks like we're going to preempt something, then they step in and say, right, that even if we don't vote for it to go to committee, they look and see from the outside that we're discussing it and we're having questions. So therefore that can then go to the committee. There's a lot to be asked, you know, from what we're probably saying, asking the questions what these guys wanted to say when they call it in. And then they stop us doing that because we're going to start preempting. So that's when mostly they go to committee. So it really works as I can see it. The call-in thing, that's another thing for Simon to answer, but it takes a lot of other things in, you know, with time things going out again with planners, agents and everything else. So you'd end up probably going 2 months before you got an application forward.
Thank you, Peter. Gordon.
Well, yes, I just wanted to come in to this. Generally speaking, I think it works well. I mean, there have been a number of suggestions which no doubt the officers and Nigel will consider, which may or may not improve it, I don't know. But where I think the committee is slightly losing track is the reason for the panel. The panel is simply to decide whether or not an application should go to the committee for decision. And I know that certainly if there's one in my ward, I can decide in less than the 23 days whether it is worthy to go there, whether it ought to go there. And I think that's where members ought to be looking at the panel. Should this go to the committee or could it avoid going to the committee? And that's the only decision that we could make at the panel, which is why it finishes up, I think, often being an officer decision, and why sometimes it shouldn't be a member decision. It is not a second go at the application. It's should it be heard by committee or not?
Thank you. Rodri, I call me to speak. Okay. So just going through the points. Firstly, on the cutoff, I wholeheartedly agree that that should be reviewed. I think there should be several triggers that should allow that cutoff to be extended. This is because we as members are on the front line with our communities. Our communities aren't necessarily experts on planning. I can envisage a situation where an application is made and 23 days elapses, and it's only on day 24 that 15 neighbours get together and decide to make representations, by which point you're stopped out. I also completely agree if there's a reconsultation that should allow effectively to be from fresh, because it's effectively a different application. So I agree that the cutoff should be reviewed. I am also conscious. So I came from a different council before this one, and in that council, local members had the power to direct something to go to committee themselves. So if I, as a member for Sheringham South Ward, felt there was something that should go to committee, I would simply say I wanted to go to the committee, and it would go to the committee. There was no other member, there was no oversight, it went straight. And that isn't necessarily the best model, because it does mean that your committees get chunked up with a lot of applications which don't necessarily merit that. However, I do think members need to be able to show that they've done their best by their community to bring something to committee. And it's fine that we have this filter that stops spurious applications that don't merit a committee hearing from going to the committee. But equally, having a cutoff or preventing members from making rejoinder points after an officer presentation, it feels at the moment that some of the processes are a little more balanced towards technocracy. And It's a quasi-judicial process. Sometimes I think it's a little perverse that members have any say about planning at all. We might as well send it all to Bristol, because it's the only situation I've ever heard of where you have a set of professionals and there's a committee of laymen to overrule them, which is effectively the system that we have in the planning system. But it is our system, and it's the democratic system. And if there's a democratic system, I am uncomfortable with members not having the final say in a chairman's panel on whether it should go to committee or not, because we previously trusted Nigel with that. He was a democratically elected member. He would have the final say on whether or not it should go to committee. And what we have done is we've divested members of some of that power, and it now sits with officers who can make the final decision, which leads me to think, well, actually, why bother having a chairman's panel? I'm confident that Simon can make a decision about whether something should be going, sorry, Mike, senior moment. I'm confident they can make a decision about whether something merits going to the planning committee. But if I'm so confident of that, then why bother having a chairman's panel at all? We don't need it. We could just have officers decide whether something should go to a committee. So clearly there is some merit in having members' input because of the local knowledge. And I think it's a question of where that balance lies. And I think if elected members on the chairman's panel say, yes, we think that should go to committee, then that's it. It then goes to committee. It can't be overruled by officers. But it's a nuanced argument to make. But those are the three things: is the balance of member interventions in a panel, a review of the cutoff, and I also think it should be reviewed as to whether or not members or officers have the ultimate say on whether or not a chairman's panel sends a matter to committee. I've had indications from Mark, and I had three. Someone else did as well. Okay, sorry. So we'll go Terry, we'll go Mark, then we'll go David, then we'll go Steve.
Thank you, Jim. Just a relatively minor point, I hope, and at risk of being pedantic. I think it's really important that people have confidence in the process. I've heard repeatedly that the panel is not a decision-making body, and then several councillors, senior councillors and others say that the panel's made a decision. They're making a decision to recommend to the officers what they think the decision should be, but ultimately the officers make the decision. And I just think it might be a little bit pedantic, but the process needs to be clear for people to have confidence in it. And I just wanted to make that point, that we need to be careful as members, I think, when describing the decision-making process.
Can I stop you there? Because this is actually a really important point, and one that potentially I have misunderstood myself, which is when Nigel used to make a decision or a non-decision to send something to committee, that wasn't a decision. As in, members of the public didn't need to be present for Nigel to decide it. He could do it wherever he liked, whenever he liked, and then it went to committee. My understanding would be if members were the ultimate arbiters of whether something would go to committee in this chairman's panel, that is a not decision-making body, that would still be a non-decision-making body, but one where members were the ones deciding whether we would effectively replace Nigel with a panel of members, and it would still not be taking an actual decision. But is that correct?
Thank you, Chairman. Can I just build up to the answer? Firstly, to point out, as Councillor Bambridge said, this is an issue as to the forum through which a planning application is decided. In other words, it is a decision as to how to make a decision. Ultimately, if an officer is not making that decision as to how to make the decision, the only other option is for members to do that. And if members are going to do that, then you have all the issues that touch and concern formal meetings, political weighting, having to give the requisite statutory notice of a meeting. And the reason why we have decided not to do that up to now is because ultimately you would have all this statutory regulation that touches and concerns how we are going to make a planning decision. And it is seen to be extremely unwieldy. However, if that is what is deemed to be the best thing to do, then it is legally possible. I would also point out in passing that this probably does need to be put in a context, that in over 95% of the cases, either Rob or I agreed with the majority view of members. And speaking personally, not necessarily for Rob, I find it extremely useful to listen very carefully to what the members are saying. And over 9.5 times out of 10, I agree with them.
Thank you. In which case, could I just clarify, in the old world, when Nigel used to decide whether or not, he wasn't making the decision, presumably, it was an officer who actually decided it.
It was the planning chairman in consultation with myself as executive director or my predecessor. So it was in consultation. So it'd be a single member and the executive director. So essentially, you're broadening it beyond a single member to a panel of 3 with the officer rather than just a single relationship between chairman and director.
And were there any instances where you overruled the chairman? Given that in 9.5 cases out of 10, it's been an agreement, but there was a 5% chance previously.
I can't say definitively because it was some time ago now, but what I would say is even in the absolute vast majority of cases where either Mike or I have not followed the recommendation of the panel, that has led to further member scrutiny because we've sent it to committee, i.e. that is essentially myself refusing to accept the delegation because I'm uncomfortable making the decision in a delegated way, and I'm therefore choosing to send it to committee. So even when we're disagreeing with panel, with the exception of one case, and I don't want to get into individual cases specifically, there's only one case where that hasn't occurred. So when we've disagreed with the panel of 3, the vast majority of cases has meant that has then gone to committee. It hasn't meant that either Mike or I have then gone away and made the decision. So it's led to more member scrutiny, not less.
Understood. Sorry, Nigel, you were just going to intervene on that point.
I was just going to say in the old times, it was myself and a senior officer who discussed each individual call-in. And often the case would be that I would look at it and it was a brick outside lavatory, for want of a better word. And I would say straight away, look at it, it's just one that would get a nod through. So there's no point in discussing it at a committee, you know, I'll just have it delegated. And the officer would say, well, yes, but both neighbours have objected very, very strongly to it. The parish council are not happy about it because it's in a terrace and we might have all the rest of them. It's the officers consider, would you consider that maybe it ought to go to committee? And at which point I would say, no, because it's just a toilet. Or I would say, no, all right, fair enough, that's brought. And that would be the consideration where the officer's input would be. And can I just, before we go on, there are 3 sections of this panel. 1, the old times. 2, myself and my vice chairman and officers in a room. And then the 3rd one is COVID. COVID put it onto the screen with Zoom, and it changed a lot of things. We also had, we have the recommendation of where the officers would be looking, which we never had before. So that's given us a lot more insight into the direction. And it helps and it doesn't help, but it has changed over the time. I'll come back at the end.
I'm going to go to Mark first because he hasn't spoken, and then I'll come to you, David. I note your frustration, so.
Yes, thank you, Chairman. I'm perfectly happy with the way that the Chairman's panel works, so that's a statement on top of it. But I am concerned about the 23 days in another aspect, though. When I first started this job in 2007, virtually every parish council had a monthly meeting, and the likelihood of the 23 days occurring straddling one of their meetings was great. But now it's 60 days, where they then go they get an application in just after their last meeting, they ask for extension from the officers to submit their comments, I think that should extend the 23 days beyond that parish council meeting, so that the member concerned, when he attends a parish council meeting, can decide whether there's enough opposition or whatever the parish council say, can actually go to the can call it in if necessary. And I think that's something which needs to be looked at, and maybe Nigel could do that. Thank you.
Thank you, David.
Thank you, Chair. Just coming back on to trying to close the discussion on this particular aspect of it. I've just brought up the panel outcomes from the 9th of September, which I've referred to previously, which I think is great. But I think in terms of openness, it would be useful. On this one occasion, there was an overturn on that particular session. And there is a box there that says comments. And may I ask that maybe in that comment box, a reason might be given why the officer overturned the committee's, the panel's decision. I think in terms of openness, that would be quite useful. Thank you.
Thank you. At that moment, I'm going to let Rob come in because he's been bullying me the whole session.
I think that's just reinforcing the view we're trying to get away from around the table, Chairman. Just to clarify, we're not overturning a decision, referring back to the previous point. It's a recommendation from the panel rather than a decision, but going against the recommendation, and take that point on board. Just to pick up on a few points, the delegation is to myself as executive director rather than as monitoring officer too, so it's not to the statutory post, it's to the director post, and it's through that I then delegate further authority to Mike. I'm very careful on who has delegated authority to do these decisions, and that's partly because I see this as one of the most serious aspects of the job that we do. The rules in which we're obliged to follow are set out in the Constitution in the scheme of delegations. So what can and can't be delegated and what route is determined through that scheme of delegations. For me, the virtual environment is far more, is absolutely transparent. I'm not so worried about how many members attend. It's the fact that every single member can attend every single chairman's panel without fail. I think we understand it's not a public meeting because we're not actually determining the planning application. We're just determining how to determine the planning application. I take this really, really seriously because I get that the significant part of an elected member's role is dealing with planning applications. So, you know, I often take quite a cautious approach to how much we deal with as delegated rather than going to planning committee, because I'm reflective and understanding of your role as elected members. I have absolute sympathy for what Councillor Askew's described, because in a planning committee, you're talking about determination of the application. So you're talking about the merits of the application, where in Chairman's panel, you're restricted to a conversation about why it should go to committee rather than the actual merits of the application itself. So, and that's often a line we have to carefully manage and walk. But I understand the description of how it's difficult to talk in one environment rather than the other. I can't speak for Nigel, but I think the point made about presentation, about when members get to speak and whether they get to correct or challenge something that an officer has presented, I think is something we can take away and learn from and perhaps introduce. Because if that would help the ward members who are speaking at the committee to feel as though their opinion and voice and the knowledge they have from their patch is better heard, then I don't think there's any reason we can't do that. I think for me, just to finish off, is for us as officers, the chairman's panel is important. It came on the back of a PAS recommendation, so it wasn't something we set up blind, the Planning Advisory Service. Yes, it was about reducing the amount of small applications that went to planning committee, but it was also, and perhaps more importantly, about giving greater oversight to the planning process to elected members as well, not reducing it. So I know Nigel and I will reiterate the point of it was just, you know, an executive director or whoever he or she delegates and the chairman of the planning committee determine what goes to committee or not. It was broadening that to a far wider member audience, which I think the chairman's panel has been successful at. It's worth noting that everything that goes to chairman's panel could be delegated. So by default you can make a recommendation to delegate. That means everything that's in that room for consideration can be dealt with as a delegated decision. It doesn't have to go to committee. So we're actually, as officers, not taking all the delegations you know, that are obliged to us under the scheme of delegations, because we're making sure that there's as much member oversight as possible. Now, people often ask what's contentious, what's serious, what makes your mind up? And you could go really black and white on defining those. The challenge with black and white is it doesn't give you flexibility for different circumstances and different knowledge and information you may share as ward members with us when we determine the decision. So I'd be wary about going too specific in a scheme of delegations. But just from my perspective, you know, we could tweak the process to get it better. And I think we've heard a couple of examples today of how we could make it better. I firmly believe it strengthened our decision-making process and made it more transparent. And please be assured, as long as the delegation rests with me, I will continue to take the cautious approach. And that if I'm in any doubt, it is going to planning committee. So the times when I'm going against a recommendation and sending it to planning committee is often when there's not a unanimous vote amongst the 3 members, when the 3 members are taking a different view to the ward member, or where as an officer I've heard significant noise about an application within a community setting and actually there's wider factors at play. So please be assured this is us as officers trying to ensure there is greater oversight of the planning process and that it lands in the appropriate place. I appreciate we're developing the process as we've gone along, and I think we've overcome some of the early scepticism. And if we implement the changes suggested about opportunity to come back after officer presentations, the balance between the time officers take, like I am now, and the opportunity you've got as members to speak and make sure that's more appropriately balanced, I think those are things we can do. But please be assured, this is us trying to get more of your oversight, not less.
Thank you. I had indications from Steve, and I think that is it. Do you have anything to add, Steve?
Well, I wasn't going to, but I just wanted to make the point. I take on board everything Robert said, and I feel quite heartened what I've heard today, to be honest, because I do feel the panel has its place. I've never said I don't think it should happen. I think it's a good thing. It is about just getting it tweaked, and I think, you know, if you're taking on board the things that you've heard today, then I think it's in good stead. Thank you.
Thank you very much. So, go on, very briefly.
Yeah, it's brief. I'm just going to say that as long as the ward member can actually go in and either use Steve's term, he doesn't feel shackled, or my term, you're not going in there with one arm tied behind your back, allowed to expand and perhaps have some right of return of answer, I think I'll be content.
Thank you. So it's before the committee to note the report. Obviously, we've raised some points that we'd like considered. I think the appropriate place would be to send it to the Governance and Audit Committee, but I am minded if Simon and Nigel are agreeable that they take those points away and liaise with the powers that be on that to address them as they see fit based on the committee's comments. Is that okay, Nigel?
Yeah, that's fine. I've made comments to us, Simon, so we can follow it through. I just wanted to say that I had a developer, quite a substantial developer, speak to me out of committee at a function, and said that he was asked by someone to, because this other person bills all over the place, he really wanted to see planning at its best, and where would he go? And without question, the person said to him, just go to Breckland, don't go anywhere else. He said, the Breckland committee, it runs well, the whole system is in place. And just to bring that, and I'm not going to name names, I have written them here, but when Frank Sharp was my vice chairman, we went on a sabbatical of other authorities, and one of the authorities on a application with regards to the change of the plan from 2 windows to an arch window with a balcony, that decision was a site visit. Now, it'd be all right, apart from the fact they hadn't even built the first one with the 2 windows, so they were going to have a site visit on a house that had nothing beside it. I'm not quite sure if there was a good pub or a fish and chip shop there. And then another authority do pre-meetings, which I never want to get, because it's like you're all in a little room. We have 10 items on today. We're going to discuss them in a room when the public aren't present. You know, I've said no way. So I'm going to stand at that. It's not going to happen here. Everything comes out. It's all put in front of it. All my members are told, read your agendas. I don't want any member turning up to my committee who hasn't read an agenda. So I can assure you the planning committee is going to run to its best, and everything noted down here. And thank you for your time, Chairman, and thank you for keeping my chair nice and warm.
Thank you very much. Roger.
Just quickly want to make a point, Chairman. You suggested this goes to the Government and Audit Committee. Could I suggest that Nigel, Simon, Rob are going to go away and do some work on this, that perhaps that just needs to go to the Planning Committee first, purely because the members of the Planning Committee are the ones that make up the Chairman's panel, and then we can just say, yes, we're happy with those changes before it goes to governance.
Yeah, so to be clear, I may have been unclear. I am delegating to Nigel and Simon whatever process they think best fits how they're going to take on board Scrutiny's comments today. If that obviously involves the Planning Committee, then that sounds very sensible to me. But yes. Are members then happy to note the report, and we'll move on to the next item? Excellent. Thank you all for that. Another fantastic bit of debating. Right. Yes. Sorry, Mike. Very good. We have two final items. I'm sorry for making you, I mean, obviously it's been exciting, but I'm sorry for making you have to wait through all of that. If we go to item 9, which is key performance indicator proposal, how would you like to proceed?
Thank you, Chair. I'm really happy to bring forward the proposed indicator list to this commission today. The list has been assembled in light of the new corporate plan and will be one of the ways the council provides updates to how it is performing against what it is set out to do. Both Jason and Ryan have worked with the assistant directors over the preceding few months to help compile this long list. They've also sought feedback from yourselves earlier this year. If agreed, we will submit the list to Cabinet for approval. And if approved, we'll report on these indicators from Q3. This will be reported to yourselves in January of next year. And at this stage, I will now pass over to Ryan, who's going to go over some specifics from this extensive list.
Thank you. So yes, just on the list. So it's a list of about 60. We'd be sort of seeking some feedback to get that down to a shorter list to bring before Cabinet. Would be what we'd be seeking to do. Just a couple of points to point out. So there's a lot of stuff in there about satisfaction. Some of those satisfaction measures aren't set up yet, so wouldn't be available for Q3. So that's just something to bear in mind equally as we talk about in the report with the project reporting, which we're aiming to bring in Q3. That's pretty much it. I'm aware that obviously it's been a long session. So I just want to make members aware that obviously we can have feedback today and we can bring a short list to then be agreed in December, which wouldn't affect the Q3 reporting. That's obviously an option if you'd like to take that, but I'm obviously happy to take any feedback on the list.
Thank you. You've all had the report. If I could ask you to focus your fire on any ones you want to take out of the list, that would be great. Oh, sorry, or indeed add to the 60 that we already have before us. David, then Tim, then Harry.
Thank you, Chair. It's actually not adding another one to the list. It's something that's already on the list, which I think would be, in view of the certain problems we have at the moment, would be good to be added to that particular title. And under planning, could we also include enforcement? Because there's such an issue now with enforcement. I have a letter in front of me from Gary Collins to Swaffham Town Council, dated the 19th of October, basically saying that nothing can be done because there's nobody there to do it. So I think enforcement is a major issue. And if we could be added to the planning heading, then I think that would be very useful. Thank you.
I'd have to check with someone from planning on that and feedback to you. But yeah, I'll take that away.
Thank you, Chairman. So try and speed through, shall I? Section paragraph 1.5, page 19 says focusing on the wrong or too many metrics can be detrimental. Absolutely, I agree with that. But what that paragraph does not say is a lack of focus or too few metrics is detrimental too. And that is important because it's probably more detrimental, because if you've got too much, you can filter it out. But if you haven't got enough data, you can't create it out of nothing. So I am slightly concerned about the a sort of a written in bias in the way that it's presented. So can I go directly to page 25, which is the climate KPIs. Now, look, we've declared the climate emergency. We need to get to net zero by 2035. We're going to need to measure our carbon to be able to get there, but we don't seem to have any metrics on measuring our carbon emissions or how we're reducing them. We go through, so we've got, and some of these aren't really actually climate. I think there is a pretty fundamental misrepresentation or misunderstanding between the difference between environmental issues, which I fully support, and climate issues, which are to do with our climate emergency and reducing carbon and greenhouse gases. So you take some of these, so the Green Community Grants one, so this is on page 25. I mean, some of the grants that are awarded might well increase greenhouse gas emissions. I'm thinking, you know, the recent one was a grant to buy a lawnmower. Well, the lawnmower is a petrol one, so that's actually an increase. So I'm worried that we're not got the right measures, the right metrics in the right place, and that we are, where we're labeling them as climate, that's not so. Same sort of applies to enforcement actions, which are presumably predominantly fly tipping. I'm not sure that that has a direct greenhouse gas emission benefit. It certainly has an environmental one, most definitely, which I fully support, but it's in the wrong place. We do have one here, staff active travel options. There is, you know, a greenhouse gas reduction measure, which we can quantify there. But I'm going to come back to what I said about the climate emergency. This is like scratching a tiny little piece of it, whereas we haven't got to the core of this matter. We decided we're going to get to net zero 2035, but we're not measuring it. We've got nothing to take us forward.
Thank you. Harry, then Philip.
Thank you, Chairman. I may be jumping ahead, but I don't want to get in ahead of members of the Commission. I've got a couple of comments and observations on Appendix A, if that's agreeable. Thank you. Yes, on Appendix A, again, one of the KPIs there we've had, and Ryan knows I've mentioned this before at different forums, we mentioned about complaints. And one of my suggestions I've made, I think it might have been at Governance and Audit or at Scrutiny, was that we didn't have a breakdown of complaints. When we've had the pie charts and things, we haven't had them broken down into the types of complaints. So whilst we might have had complaints received, resolved, etc., so a breakdown between particular localities, we don't want to identify in terms of, because that may get into GDPR issues, but in terms of the types of issues that come up. So that's one observation on the quarter 2 on Appendix A. The other issue there, which is potentially 2 areas potentially possibly need to read across to the risk register, that whether that's strategic team or and also at governance and audit, is one, there's a reference there to the challenge around bringing houses back into occupation and the housing team. So there may be some things where we need to look at the KPIs, but also reading across into how the KPIs relate to a risk. Like we haven't been able to recruit enough planners, housing officers, etc. The third thing which relates potentially a risk there is direct question to Ryan, is there's a reference there to the commercial property portfolio and challenges there. But again, because I haven't seen that, speaking as a member of the Governance Audit Commission, I haven't seen that flagged up as on the strategic risk register. So it's really a sort of, one is the complaints about having a bit more beef on that, and the other is where there's a potential challenge in reading that across the risk register. So those observations, but otherwise, thank you very much.
Thank you, Philip, then Terry.
Thank you. Councillor Burt's covered most of what I wanted to talk about, but I would just like to think we should go back to the climate change report we had earlier in the year and look at the recommendations there to try and see what progress we're making on those. And those did highlight the big carbon emission buildings that are under our control. And I think the minimum we should be doing is measuring those.
Thank you. Terry?
Thank you. I'm very pleased to see the new list broadened out, and particularly pleased to see the points around economy and growth, which are absolutely key and were, I think, particularly missing in the past. I just wanted some reassurance really on the section that talks about jobs supported. I don't want the field to be too narrow when we're considering jobs. Obviously, job creation is important, but what we're really looking for is well-paid jobs, referring back to the slide earlier about the average pay in Breckland. So just some reassurance really that when we're looking at that, it's not a narrow view of pure job creation, but actually the range and type of jobs created is as important. Thank you.
Thank you. I don't see other members wishing to comment. I'm conscious, so there are a lot of KPIs on here, and each KPI is work for officers. And I've gone through them and I've got some suggestions for ones that I think should be reported only by exception, or indeed shouldn't necessarily always come to scrutiny. So just going through, and then members can object as I speak if they particularly feel strongly about a particular item. But on page 23, health and safety property compliance, my view is that we would expect that to always be taking place. So I think that should be reported by exception only in the event that there's been a breach, rather than us seeing hopefully 100% every quarter. On page 24, the Silk Tide overall external score. I think that's really an executive member's role to make sure the website's doing everything it must do. Obviously, if that's not happening, then that's an item I hope we'd consider separately, but I don't think we should be having reporting specifically on that. On page 25, the Silk Tide overall internal score, again, I think that's probably without our remit, but maybe subject to a separate report if necessary. Then looking at amount of carbon saved by staff, emissions from reduced from trees, percentage of, number of additional vehicle charging points installed, I would be inclined to agree. We have a net zero target. I would much prefer that the Commission was provided with the figure that the Council is generating in terms of CO2 emissions, and then we can see if that figure is going down. Because whilst I'm sure we'll be able to show we're saving carbon in those individual areas, I think the real question for scrutiny is our overall strategy to get to net zero working? And we can only really deduce that from an overall figure of CO2 emissions that the Council is emitting. I don't know if that's something that you guys are able to generate.
So I believe we can look at stuff like that. My comment would be that it would probably be something we'd only do annually though. So whether that's something we would want in the quarterly report, I'll leave up to the Commission as to what they'd like. But that's why we've got those other measures in
Understood. There. Okay, we'll come back to those three then. Facebook engagement and Twitter engagement, I think that's probably a level of detail that's too high for this committee. Similarly, percentage of staff who feel well supported by the Council, I'm inclined to think that that should form part of a single report annually that tells us how the Council's doing in respect of staff. And then I would have percentage and number of claims of compensation. I'd have that reported by exception, because I hope that we're not subject to large numbers of claims for compensation from members of the public. Additionally, ICO decisions upheld. Again, that should be reported by exception, because I expect hopefully generally we are compliant with the requirements of data protection, etc. And then lastly, directly supported survivors. I think you should also provide that by exception or as part of a single report annually rather than a quarterly update. The percentage encouraged to try new things, feel part of the community, total attendance. I think that would be useful as a single report, probably on a less regular basis. And then, as much as I love Thetford, the total referrals from the Thetford Citizens Advice, again, I feel is perhaps slightly too bespoke. for this committee. And perhaps we would consider that being subject to something separate. And then lastly, on page 28, percentage of category 1 hazard repairs. I don't know what a category 1 hazard repair is, but I'm hoping that we're doing them generally. So I think all of the stuff on HMOs and hazard repairs should be reported either in a single report annually or potentially not seen by this committee unless it starts becoming a significant issue, and it's not one that's been raised with me previously. Councillor Burt, I'm hoping you're going to object to some of my suggestions.
I am certainly going to ask to keep the category 1 hazard repairs on the list. I would recommend looking at the slides from the housing training that we had recently. Very informative, and I do think that's a measure that perhaps we need to concentrate more on. You mentioned some of them on being reported by exception, and fine, I think I go along with much of what you said. How do we ensure that that those ones are reported by exception, and that we do get them, and that they're just not reported?
Well, I suppose we can dip test, can't we, Tim?
Okay.
We'll bring in the relevant executive member and we'll put them on the spot and say, ha, have there been any that haven't been reported by exception that should have been?
That's what I mean. I think it would be better if we actually said, look, if these are coming up, we want to know about it, rather than just hoping that somebody remembers to let us know.
Very good. Terry.
Thank you, Chairman. Agree with your list, aside from the one in relation to Thetford, as you might expect. That's a service that we directly fund as a council. And I think it's really important that we monitor that to, one, ensure that we get value for money in terms of the numbers of people that are being supported on an ongoing basis, and also to spot increases in demand, frankly, and how the council may be able to respond to that. Not just Thetford, of course, because it's Thetford and district, so the beneficiaries are much wider than Thetford, even though it's based in Thetford. But we do put money into it, and it's a good thing that we do, and we should monitor that.
Very good. Are there any final comments? In which case, the committee has made its preliminary comments on your list. Hopefully that is helpful in helping you narrow down what you bring back in December. With that, we'll move on to the next item, which is the performance report for 21-22. I'm impressed we're still going. Well done. Please don't call in any more items. That's true. Mark, if you want to quickly introduce that report.
Thank you, Chairman. The Q2 quarter 2 performance report outlines the council's performance from July to September this year. As members will see, the council is still working through a difficult period in relation to the customer contact centre, but has set out positive steps and changes in commentary for these items. Whilst performance in this area will not be an overnight fix, it's hoped that by Q3 we'll be in a more positive picture moving forward. Members will also note the performance around environmental services, which have previously been discussed at this commission. Whilst there has been improvement in missed bins, the council remains much higher than what we had previously reported. This situation continues to be monitored to ensure that improvement continues. And I will now hand over to Ryan to talk you through some of the other specifics within the report.
Wonderful, thank you. I'm just going to go through some points quickly. So, for example, I know customer performance is on there, and what we've seen is, again, a dip. We have included some additional information there. Equally, Jason's here to answer any questions members may have on that. We've changed the targets around FOIs and complaints. That's now amber, as you can see, although there has been a drop in that as well. On the commercial property portfolio, it is marked as amber. However, we subsequently re-looked at those targets after publication, and we realised that target was set back in 2018. So whilst it's marked as amber on there, it should in fact be green now based against the new target, because obviously the portfolio has subsequently changed since 2018. Again, you'll see staff sickness is high, but that is to be expected a little bit through the seasonality and a little bit through, we're expecting there to be a higher rate of sickness this year based on various factors. And equally, like I said, planning is in there, and it has fallen fairly significantly last quarter. However, we are still above our annual target. What we're doing that is we're just going to monitor it for the next few months to make sure it was just a one-off there. If you're happy as well, I know Councillor Clark raised some questions in the last point, which I can deal with now, which are about the performance report.
Go ahead.
So in terms of complaints, I completely agree, it has been raised before. It's the challenge of getting as much in the narrative as possible. What we are looking at is to bring an annual report around complaints, which would have stuff around locations, which services are getting them, uphold rates, stuff like that, to give that information, just because on a quarterly basis it might be quite minuscule. In terms of the challenges around housing, so what we're seeing, and you know, it is still zero in terms of the empty properties brought back and used by the council. The reason for that is we're getting a lot of an increased demand in people coming to us for housing advice that isn't necessarily reflected in the duty part, because that's under the Homelessness Prevention Act. So we're limited in what we do on that. But essentially what's happened is that team's been pushed into other areas of the housing team. I'm happy to pass on your comments, councillor, just around that. And the last one was around the commercial property portfolio, which I've sort of touched on there, but obviously in the narrative, it does talk about the challenges there. So the commercial property risk is now under the medium-term financial plan, which was agreed at last governance and audit. There's nothing specifically that's been flagged to me by finance that the commercial property aspect of that risk is increasing the medium-term financial plan risk at the moment, but it is one of the elements we continue to monitor because it does feed into that risk. I hope that answers your questions.
Thank you very much. So firstly, are there any member comments on the report? We'll go to Terry, then Tim. Go ahead, Terry.
Thank you. Just very briefly, worth highlighting that there's been a decrease in the numbers of individual fly tips, but an increase in the tonnage. Personally, I think that directly relates to the fact that there has been a delay in removing fly tips, and what tends to happen is if people see one, it's fair game and people go and add to it, frankly, which is a concern of mine. Similarly, there's a concern with the bulky waste collection service, where there are delays in people that have paid for a service having to wait up to 2 weeks for stuff to be removed. They're told to leave items on the street for collection, which get added to as well by other people, and that the guidance for that has changed. But it is a sort of a warning sign for me that the tonnage continues to increase with fly tipping, because there's a bit of a delay now linked to all the other issues with Serco in the removal of fly tips. So the performance report is there to highlight particular areas of concern, and that is one for me.
Thank you. And we'll go to Tim and then I'll go back to Brian.
Thank you. So page 32, I think we're going to remove this one, aren't we? This is because we're looking at retweets and Twitter followers, but total website visitors. I think I mentioned before that the way that we measure that is using Google Analytics, and the Google Analytics script is not on every page of the council's website. Far, far from it. There's a lot of pages which are not analysed. So I think the figures there are misleading, but I don't, you know, I think we have to do some work on that to actually get some accuracy in there if we're going to continue to report that. Page 33. We've looked at FOI response times before, and I think we've considered that an important part of the FOI response time is not just a matter of staying within the statutory timescale, but part of it is to make sure that you respond as quickly as possible. And I thought we were going to do something on there to find a way of showing us our response times, maybe a histogram or something like that, because it needs to be noted that we can still fall foul of the ICO, even if we've answered FOIs within the statutory timescale, because we haven't done it fast enough. So I think we need perhaps a better way of reporting that. I suggest a histogram of, you know, so whatever it is, the 70 complaints, how many of them got done in 5 days and how many got done in 28 days. And I've just put this comment on the bottom. And are we ever going to bring any houses back into use? Because that seems to have been zero for years.
Thank you, Tim. Going to Ryan, the only point I'd make on the FOI is I think that's part of the review that we'll be looking at the FOI KPI, but we lumped that in last time, I think, with the overall review, rather than them trying to address it for this quarter, is my recollection. On the other points, Ryan, are you able to speak to them?
Yeah, so website visitors, I think we put in there that we're still looking at it, and it's in there for continuity at the moment, because obviously that's something we're looking at as part of the review. FOI response times, we did have an average of 8, which is in the narrative. I know we have raised about the histogram before. That was before we were limited in the format of what we could bring when we did it in the cartoon. I think you previously referred to it as councillor. We can look at that again if that's easier. I know we have previously said how many we close in X number of days, but that's something we can again. And housing to use, like I said, I'm happy to get comment from the assistant director responsible for housing, but as I said, it's just a case of at the moment we're having to reprioritise the people who would normally be in charge of that to bring it to other areas. Equally, one of the things about bringing housing to use is it is a lengthy process at times. I know it has gone on for a while, but it's not, you know, we're talking to landlords and stuff eventually comes back into use. But I will email that director to get comment for when I send out an email to members after this committee.
Thank you. Sorry, Rob, you wanted to?
Yeah, just to pick on the empty properties issue, and I think it's a fair challenge, but you'll note 2 rows down the number of empty properties in Breckland compared to the quarter of the preceding year is significantly improved by 225. Take the point, valid challenge, but the overall picture for Breckland is extremely good.
Excellent. Any final comments from members on any aspects of this report? Seeing none, are members happy to note this report? Thank you, in which case we move to item 11, I believe, which is outside body feedback. Do any members have any outside body feedback they wish to make us aware of? Peter?
Thank you, Mr. Chairman. Yeah, as Breckland's representative on the Queen Elizabeth Hospital, as you're all aware, they are trying to get on the next list of 8 government new hospitals. I think there's a fair chance of that happening. Liz Truss and James Wild are working hard on that all the time, speaking to the ministers direct. I actually feed then in to Liz Truss issues that happen in the hospital, which ministers probably wouldn't hear about. So that's hopefully going well. And because of that, the endoscopy, if that's the right word, endoscopy department is having to move out the main building because of the repairs to the roof and everything, and they're going to use £12 million from the government funding for emergency repairs. They got 20.6 million government funding for emergency repairs, and they're going to build this endoscopy unit, and hopefully that'll be up and running for residents in the spring. The Youth Advisory Board, I represent Breckland. As you're probably aware, Breckland Council funded £20,000 to a mental health support programme. I signed the service agreement on behalf of Breckland Yab last week, and Steve has signed up for the Breckland Council, so that's now going to go ahead. That's going to be a peer support programme by the Youth Advisory Board to fill a gap for residents which is left between from when they are diagnosed that they need support and health and the help. And I'd like to think that that will work side by side with the programme you've heard this morning, which is going to be put forward through the Inspiring Communities programme of Breckland.
Brilliant. Thank you, Peter. Any other members? David?
Thank you, Chair. Just very briefly, having just agreed a grant to Thetford Under-12s Football Club, the Hammonds Educational Trust, just a reminder that we are out there in the entirety of the Breckland district to help young people up to the age of 21 in sporting activities, educational activities, etc., ranging from our last meeting, for example, when we had a young lady who should be nameless, of course, who just won a place at the Pittsburgh Ballet School in America and needed some financial help in terms of fulfilling her career as a ballerina, and Under-12s Football Club in Thetford. So a wide range of grants that we can give, provided the people live in Breckland and they're under the age of 21. So just a reminder, if you have anything that you think might fit into that, please do email me accordingly, and I can give some advice as to whether we might be able to offer a grant. Thank you.
Thank you. Any final comments from members on this item? I see none. We've done item 12. Item 13, I'm not aware of any calls for action. The work programme, item 14, members have the work programme before them. Are there any items? Tim, and then Roger.
Yeah, thank you, Chairman. I think it's kind of slightly related. with our 16th of December one, where we're looking at the climate change programme. I mean, climate change has resulted in flooding. And I'd request that we ask Liz Witcher to present to OSC at the next meeting, because you know, it is kind of related. Liz is the chair of the Watton and Sayham Tony Flood Action Group. She has a huge amount of expertise, and I think it would be valuable for the Commission to tap into that expertise. Now, I appreciate that you know, that we're still under that sort of overarching Norfolk Flood Alliance chaired by Lord Dannock, but I think it's really quite important that we stay on top of the local impacts and understand progress of that overarching report, rather than merely waiting for it to complete and us get to the end. So, and I've spoken to Liz. I understand she's got a sort of a presentation which will take about 20 minutes or so. That's my request.
Okay, I'm not totally convinced that that's a scrutiny item as much as a sort of informative item that members might want to do outside of a formal meeting. But obviously I bow to my members' direction on the work programme. Roger, you were going to make a point.
Yes, two, if I may, Chair. At the last meeting, we had Serco come and gave a presentation, and we did talk about task and finish group. You did email me and I responded, and I'm just wondering what the progress is on that task and finish group, because I've certainly not had any invitation to have any input in on that yet. And also, I noticed on the bottom of this list, there was a request from Councillor Linda Turner at some point to invite Anglian Water and UK Power Networks to a meeting. I'm particularly keen that we perhaps get Anglian Water here, because not only that, they've just built, in the last 18 months, built a brand new sewage treatment plant at Swanton Morley, which basically it doesn't work. We've got the outflow of that is basically the pipe can't cope and it's running down the road. And obviously with all the business that's been in the national press in the last week about outflow into rivers, etc., I think it would be really useful to understand where Anglian Water are currently at with their capital programme. So if I could make that request, please. Thank you.
Thank you. So if members agree, at the moment we have one item on our December agenda, just makes a change from today at least, but I think we can probably accommodate a couple more. I would be inclined to invite both UK Power Networks and Anglian Water and see if they're able to attend on the date of that meeting. I think we will probably not do the flood item at this stage, because I don't think it's really a scrutiny item. I think it's an informative thing, and it may well be, Tim, if you speak to the powers that be, they might set up a separate session, but I don't think it falls within the remit of this committee if members are agreeable. Peter?
Yeah, sorry to interrupt, Chairman. I would second Councillor Atwell's request to bring the water board in, Anglian Water, because I was involved in that discussions and seminars with Anglian Water, and they made that Swanton Morley function sound very exciting, and I was so excited for it, thinking that's going to help Durham with its flooding issues and whatever. And obviously, if it's not working, then we really need to ask some serious questions.
No, agreed. And I think,
and with Councillor Birch's concern, I'm aware of that lady. She isn't a professional statutory expert, so I would say that's not for this commission.
Thank you. Are there any other items that members wish to consider? In which case, I'll see if there are any on the date TBC list that we can bring forward. And then, yes, if members have any ideas in the meantime, then get in touch. Terry.
Just wondering, Chairman, if you could answer Roger's point about the Serco task and finish.
Oh, yes, sorry. And that, thank you, Terry, because I was going to answer that and then completely forgot. So we will put that on the next agenda to be created. Absolutely agree that it should be. In fact, as you say, I had started to put in place a process to have that come into existence. It didn't come onto this agenda because of the full packed nature of it, but we will add its creation and its terms of reference as an agenda item on the 16th. So yes, Peter?
in defence of Serco, I've had the same problems with what Roger's had in my pack, and I noted we had 3 less cuts this year, and I felt I requested a cut last week through the portfolio holder and the officer, Rihanna, and they sent Serco out to cut this grass because I felt this last cut before the winter would stop it being up here in the spring. So they accommodated me on that. So to, you know, speaking as a fine on that one.
Thank you. Rob, did you have anything to add on Serco? I think it's premature to bring them back at this stage.
I think we took the decision of the preceding meeting to set up a task and finish, so we should just see that through.
Okay, thank you. Okay, in which case we'll move on from that, and the only item left is to agree the next meeting, which is scheduled for the 16th of December. And I bid you, after a very thorough and slightly longer than intended meeting, a good day.